I'd just like to mention that this is a collaborative event between the SKGS and Condor Consulting, Women Geoscientists in Canada, and the Decennial Mineral Exploration Conference. So with that, I will introduce our first speaker, who is Sarah. So Sarah received a Bachelor of Science in Geophysical Engineering in 2010 from Colorado School of Mines, and a PhD in Geophysics in 2016 from the University of British Columbia. Her thesis was on the feasibility of using electromagnetics to monitor steam chambers in the Athabasca oil sands, and has additional experience in inverting potential field ZTEM, EM, and DCIP data for kimberlite exploration. Sarah was a UBC postdoctoral research fellow and continued work in advanced geophysical inversions. She joined Condor Consulting in Vancouver in late 2017 as a project geophysicist, and works on processing and interpreting a variety of geophysical data, primarily for the mining industry. Sarah is a director for W2C, Women Geoscientists of Canada, the BC Geophysical Society, and the Society of Exploration and Geophysicists Mining Committee. So everyone, welcome Sarah.
Calgary is pretty snowy right now. So I've never given a talk on like this before. I've usually just given technical talks. So this is new to me, but I'm excited to present this. So I'm the director with the Women Geoscientists in Canada. It's a group that we started about a year ago after noticing some things at Exploration 17 about the amount of women in the industry and where we are, and I'll get to some of those things. And you might tell here, actually this is a fairly balanced room. We've got 11 men and 7 women, which is a good ratio actually compared to some other things. So there are approximately 12,600 geoscientists in Canada. So that includes geologists, geochemists, and geophysicists, as well as some other smaller disciplines. And I just want to open up with a quiz. How many do you think are women? And you know, I put some guesses on there, but does anyone have any idea?
10%?
20? 30?
Ask for a vote.
Yeah, well, we'll actually split it down the middle. It's at 19%. So here we're doing quite well in terms of that. So I'm just gonna, with that in mind, just share 3 thoughts today. The first one is retention. The second one is a new image, and then better representation. Those are vague words, but I'll explain as I go on. So the first one is retention. What do I mean with that? So retention means keeping women within the industry. And we see that over time, women leave. And the reasons for that are complex. They're not completely defined. So part of what we are trying to do is figure out why do women leave, and then try to fix those things. So, you know, a reason that this is important is, you know, those women have trained as geoscientists, which is expensive. Companies have hired them and trained them, that's expensive. So you want to keep those trained employees within the industry. The other thing is our industry is aging. You know, there's a lot of people that are set to retire in the next 10 years. So we need people that are studying geoscience to stay in geoscience. And we also need those fresh ideas that new people come with and bring together. There's also been a lot of research about how more diverse teams are more productive, and if you add more women on a team, the chances of risk go down. So, and this is not just in our industry, this is in any industry. So there's benefits to having women on teams and keeping them there. And not just for companies, but also for the women themselves. So, in terms of universities, about 40 to 50% of undergrad programs in the US and Canada are women in geoscience. So, you know, that balance is there in the schools, but what happens after graduation? You know, some will go into grad programs, still that's very imbalanced. As we go into further along the career, there's less and less. So this is kind of known as the leaky pipeline. Somewhere there's a perforated pipeline if you're in the industry. You know, things, people filter out. And so retention becomes a key issue in our industry. I mean, some of this is going to be related to boom bust cycles, but men don't leave in the same amounts as women do. So one thing that can help to address this is increasing a little bit of flexibility. So in terms of employers, assign or increase flexibility and thoughtfulness when giving people certain jobs. So in terms of in the mining industry, if you're working on rotation and you've got a man and a woman and they happen to be married, which happens often in our industry, that geoscientists marry geoscientists, don't always schedule them on, that one's 2 weeks in and then the other one comes 2 weeks in, so they never see each other. And that's part of having a dialogue with employees, is to make sure that things work for everyone. And then I think that working with a current employee tends to build company loyalty. If you can have that conversation, then people are more likely to stay for a place where they like to work. And then on the employee side, I think that's, if you have flexibility, you should be mindful of it too. Don't take things for granted. But don't be afraid to ask for what you need. Sometimes, maybe something hasn't ever come up in that company before, and you're like, well, this would make my life a lot easier. Maybe we can find a way to work around it. So I think there's really a conversation there that maybe in the past hasn't been had, but that we can start having. And that just doesn't help women. I think that helps families or people with more complicated lives, and especially in our industry where we are away a lot. So the other thing, I'm reading this book actually, and I think maybe it's also a bit of a culture thing. I'm reading a book about women in France and how their career is sacred to them, and they will go back to work after they've had their kids. Like the kids is 3 months old, it goes into a government subsidized daycare. They have preschools that start from 3 years old, and it's free and it's full time. So there's a bit more of a cultural way that allows women to go back into the workforce easier there too. So that would be harder to change, I think. So things to think about. So the second thing is a new image. And by that I mean that I find that the mining industry can sometimes be a bit of an old boys club. There's a lot of stories about heroics. We caught a bear in a shower and kept him there for a week while we finished the survey. I've actually heard that story. Who picked up the biggest rock and carried it back to camp. So sometimes those things aren't always inclusive, and it gives the whole industry a sort of very masculine image. And I think companies are now addressing that when they put flyers up of their company. They'll have more, visible minorities, and they'll have women more in actually in the mine settings and those kind of positions. So I think that's something we can all work a little bit on. Just to show that geology, geophysics is not just wearing plaid shirts and beards and boots. So one thing that I think goes with that is battling unconscious bias, and it's something we're all guilty of. It's unconscious. So, but there's ways to battle it. And one example that I always stood out to me was this Heidi Rosen case study. So she's a really successful venture capitalist, and this professor used her resume in his class to see how unconscious bias is filtered into looking at resumes. So he gave half the class the resume that said Heidi and the last name on top, and the other half he gave it as Howard. And students were asked to review the resume for a certain job application and say, how would you hire this person? And everyone thought, Heidi/Howard was fit for the position, but they didn't like Heidi. They liked Howard. And it was because Heidi, had a very successful career. She didn't, she stepped maybe on some toes, but she was successful. And as a woman, when someone is successful, that's kind of looked down upon. Whereas for a man, that's almost expected. So there's some words when you have a very upfront woman who's forward with her ideas, and she can be said, oh, that girl is I'm going to fill it in. But if a man does that, they'll be like, yes, he's authoritative. That's a good quality. So that's unconscious bias. And there's a couple ideas I have here to be more mindful of it. I don't think it can ever go away, but we can be mindful. So instead of saying, hey guys, try something that's a bit more inclusive. I like the idea of removing or marking out names at the top of resumes when you look at them, because then it focuses more on the qualifications and rather on the person. And it's not just for women, it's also for minorities. So names that aren't, very white or American, or those kind of things, these people suffer from it as well. And then adding or advocating for unconscious bias training has been really proven to be a way to do it, so that we can know what it is, how to recognize it, and then how to fix some of these things within companies. Harvard has a test. You can test your own implicit biases. So this is for gender, it's for age, it's for sexual orientation. They've got different tests. So even if you just Google Harvard implicit, it's kind of neat. Last thing, one more thing is with the image is zero tolerance for harassment. Our industry tends to have high levels of harassment because of the situations where we work, but it's not just even in the field or in the mine, it's also in the office. And I think that's one thing that has to stop. So for employers, I would recommend checking policies and ensuring that there's procedures for addressing it and reporting it. Sometimes there are none, sometimes it's really unclear. We should make this part of safety culture and announcements. So, we all have to go visit a new place and they give you that video of wear your hard hat, and this should be part of it as well. And then advertise it, because if people aren't aware of it and it's not right there, then they tend to not to do it. So, this is kind of aligned with the Me Too Mining group, and I've met Susan a couple times now, and so these slides are mostly from her. And so for employees, if you are a victim, find a way to report it. As people are, there's not that much, like that stigma assigned to speaking about it is reducing, and we're encouraging people to speak up. And if you witness something, also speak up. If you don't have to be like super upfront about it, but you can get that person out of that situation. You can be discreet and be like, hello, Bob, I need your help over here. It's not just men and women that get harassed, it's everybody. You can interrupt, you can tell your superiors about it. So small actions that can make a big difference in someone else's life. So the final thing is, of my 3 thoughts, is better representation. And so if you take a look at any conference, the chances are that, women make up 20% of our industry, but there won't be 20% of the people at a conference won't be women. So these figures are from Exploration 17, Ken compiled these. So 10% of session chairs were women, 14% on panels were women. And these are the technical talks for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And you can see that only on Tuesday, there were about 18% women giving talks. So take a look this week and observe this yourself if you're attending the open house. I already did the counting in here because I find it interesting. And then send more women to companies or to conferences to represent companies. It gives them a way to stay engaged in the industry. It gives them exposure, and I'm always happy to go to a conference. I learn a lot. I think it's valuable. I think it's important also for the professional and technical societies to resemble their memberships. So the SCG, Society of Exploration Geophysicists, recently had a letter sent out saying that all the committees, the people on those, on the directorship of those committees should represent the membership. So the membership sits about 20% women, while if you have a committee of 5 people, at least one should be a woman. And same with the professional associations, like the BC is the engineers and geoscientists of BC. Saskatchewan, you have the Association of Professional Engineers and Geoscience. Yeah. And promote professional development, like our workshop tomorrow, how to present. And I think it's important to invest in people. And I think all that comes back to retention as well. You invest in someone, and hopefully then they can stay and those kind of things. So just in summary, retention. We do have a problem. I don't have all the answers. I don't have any answers. I just have observations. And I'm willing to, but I want to learn more about this. I'm young-ish. And I want to stay in this industry, and so I'm interested in why people leave, and and I'm scared too. Is that what is that going to happen to me? What barriers am I going to face? Address unconscious bias and make sure that zero tolerance for harassment. I think are two big things that mining industry and geoscience in general can do for its image, and then have better representation. If we see more women at conferences, then those just coming out of school, and there's always lots of students presenting at conferences, will see themselves in the roles that they should in the future have. Those are my thoughts. Within the Women Geoscientists Canada, we have a website, wgcanada.org. We put out a monthly newsletter that you can easily sign up for. It won't spend more than that. We have a forum on Slack. Slack's a closed workspace, but we have lots of channels on there, so once you join, people share articles, talk about different things. And so you can write that down, or through the website, or just by emailing. You can also get an invite. Thank you for listening. And I hope to have a discussion later and tonight.
Any questions for Sarah? We'll get into Ken's talk.
I have a comment. I think the having harassment as part of your safety meetings is an excellent idea.
It's a
And
really easy way.
I'm just wondering if we do that. Do we?
We have a policy, we hang up in our camps.
I mean, every morning toolbox meeting.
But we don't, no, we don't have one of them.
Yeah, but that should get in there somehow. It shouldn't be just gender, it should be everything. I mean, nobody should be harassed. Nobody, if anybody's got a gripe under those terms, it should be brought up at the toolbox meetings.
And it's not just women that get harassed. In
No,
our
yeah,
industry,
exactly, yeah.
Susan had examples of men happening too, because there's always like the alpha man within a group, and then she described it like there's the people that align themselves with them, and then they pick on some. It's like kindergarten. They pick on one kid, and no one says anything.
Especially big crews.
Yeah.
Sort of mode,
Yeah.
One question I have for you is if that transcends age and gender, and,
Harassment?
well, no, the ganging up of people, the social inclination to develop groups. And like you had divided up a new image into two routes. One was to address, reporting the incidents, and the other one was actually sort of, I'm sorry, what was the other one again? It was unconscious bias. And the unconscious bias is a much larger issue. And I would say on a professional level, the idea of harassment isn't as great. It happens, I'm sure, but it isn't as great. And I think if you find women that are being harassed in an isolated drill camp, because sometimes often the drillers that are doing harassment, but I think these days they've been doing much better than that. But the point is that there's actually two main problems there. The greater problem is the unconscious bias. You probably break that down into a number of other streams as well. One of them is bullying. The other one is also just sexual in nature. You're in an isolated camp for months at a time, quite possibly. So I think the industry is starting to modernize in terms of having better access to getting employees in and out of camps. And so the rotations are going down, so you have less of these problems. I think women possibly feel more comfortable with a shorter rotation. I think men do too as well, but men tend to stay longer for whatever reason, especially. So that's one of the issues is just dealing with the, it's an issue and it's not an easy one to deal with because you're dealing with biology, and that's pretty difficult to deal with unless you take a very simple route, and that is just not having in an isolated camp, especially for long periods of time. That would be, or not then for long periods of time, but with men that have been in the field for long periods of time. So it's a big deal, it's a big problem, it's not going to be fixed easily. So.
I don't think excluding women would be the way to go.
No, but that's the
Exclude all
easy
men.
economic route.
I know, that's true.
We can just complete segregation.
Just
Women's camp over
It's
here.
just a simple, yeah.
That's what I'm trying.
Well, when you look at what gets written up in the press, and they, those newspapers, the New York Times is picking up on gender issues more. They don't worry about exploration because it's such a small part. They look at basically industrial workplaces in general, everything from automotive to the mines in Nevada and stuff like that. And there really is an issue with the blue-collar workers. They tend to be very boorish around women, extremely boorish. Some of it, they feel threatened that the women are taking their jobs. Some of it is just inappropriate behavior because they never, well, we got a president that never learned better. But, you know, most of the time you think people get some sort of morals and sort of respect for other people when they grow up as children from their family. And yet they say like the number of women in mining in Nevada is declining because of pressure from these issues. And so it's not really, it's a big issue. It's not going away. When Susan spoke to us at Keystone a couple of months ago, one of the ladies was talking about just the, drillers doing inappropriate things and the rest of it. And you say, well, what rock did they climb out from? Well, what you need is for the other men to basically make a stand right there.
Yeah.
If that behavior is happening, that person leaves the job immediately. You do not let that be tolerated.
Well, you explain to him why it's inappropriate. I mean, you don't have to fire the guy right immediately, but you can.
He won't be fired. He'll just have to find a job somewhere else.
Yeah.
And you deal with his employer, as
But a lot of it's ignorance. They just don't know any better, and they just have to be informed or educated. So it's an education.
And sometimes it's people just pushing boundaries, right? They're, a slight comment here and there. They think it's just innocent, but over time it can build up. And
well, like the term you use about bullies. Bully isn't the one incident. That's a chronic behavior. And if you've got a 35-year-old man who's being inappropriate, he's been that way for probably the last 25 years. So correction is not necessarily an easy thing when you have that systemic behavior.
Yeah.
The one that's to me very annoying, we talked about why women don't get more opportunities to present technically. I still hear the argument, and it's not an unconscious bias, it's a conscious bias. They say, well, the women don't have the experience, so we can't dumb down our sessions by allowing women to speak. Well, they don't know as much as all the smart boys do. And I think, all right, you go mentor a young lady and you help them to become qualified. So when the opportunity comes around, they have the knowledge to basically do a proper presentation. Because that to me is that's a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're basically writing them off because you're saying they don't have the experience.
And along with that, if you look at talks where people get invited versus talks where people submit an abstract, the percentage of women will always be higher when you have an open way to submit abstracts, and things are more based on that kind of experience rather than thinking about who to invite for this plenary session, and then things can.
But that statistics on the technical aspects of who gives presentations, it's a little bit biased by age as well. Because
That's true.
most, I don't know what the proportions are, but over 40 or under 40, but I would say certainly most are over 40 and much fewer under 40. So
And I think that's part of the problem too, is that the people that have the chance to go to conferences don't tend to be the people who are new within a company. So it's the older ones, and then we're looking back at those women that would have been there left 20, 30 years ago. So, but as we go forward,
That's why
nothing here
retention
is-
support, right? Because
Yeah.
if you say, okay, there's 20% are women, but if they're all young, because there's a percentage that are leaving after a few years,
Exactly.
the upper ages, the more experienced, they're just not there anymore.
Not getting
The
that
brain
job.
drain just kind of
Nope.
affects both genders, but this women especially.
and things are very balanced at the university level. Even when I graduated my undergrad, we were split right down the middle.
I have a question for you. Have you looked at Status of Women Canada's webpage? They have our 2018 budget is the most gender-based budget we've had
Yeah.
as of yet. Blah, 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 blah. I could tell you all the wonderful Government of Canada propaganda, but I won't. You should look at their GBA Plus page, and if you own a company, I suggest you all look at their GBA Plus page and take their course. It's really meant for public servants, but it'll help you. They actually, one of their examples is on the mining industry, and it will give you more ideas for this unconscious bias and more tools to look at it. Also, what do you think?
Where's this site? What is it?
It's Government of Canada, or Status of Women Canada. Yeah, Status of Women Canada. It's a government ministries point.
Yeah, I'm aware of the budget that came out and the year that was
Yeah.
quite revolutionary in that sense. But thanks for that. I'll look at it.
Yeah, it's a good one. Also, you talked about flexibility. One thing that I would like to ask you about is what do you think about contract work versus full-time positions? How do you think that affects women, or how do you think that affects women? Contract work is very much a gypsy lifestyle, as I like to call it.
Yeah, there's a lot of talk too about even in other industries, they call it like the gig economy, where people don't get full-time jobs anymore, but they get contracts. I don't have experience with it, but I can see pros and cons. It's nice if you have that flexibility, but then there's also, you lack that bit of assurance that there will be a next contract, right? So,
And maybe it's not flexibility that I would be striving for then, it would be stability.
yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
I have a full-time position at this company, I can actually maybe own a home in this town, or I could perhaps have a child. These things come with stability.
Yeah.
And my other question for you is about pay gap. What do you, we just had
Pay
legislation
gap.
come out on the pay gap. And is this something that needs to also be addressed in our industry? Because I can tell you it does. I personally had to go and to my boss write a very nice email while in camp being like, I found out I'm training people who are getting paid more than me. I'm training them.
Yes. I've heard and I've read a lot about the pay gap. The most recent thing I looked at was the Engineers and Geosciences BC. They put out a yearly report on their members and they have they include salaries and they split it between men and women at different levels in their career. And I don't necessarily see a pay gap there. It's hard because you're like an engineer. Well, there's several branches of engineering. But I do get within maybe when people aren't already at the level of a professional designation, more in other positions, that is an issue. But I've also heard stories about a geoscientist finding out she gets paid less than a man, so for the same job. That's where also the unconscious bias comes in. If you don't know a name that's assigned with a resume and an offer, maybe that helps. Those are my thoughts. These aren't not all the answers or all the questions, they're just a portion. Those
Well,
are
I
good
think
ones.
it's a multi-elemental problem. There's a lot of facets to it. By presenting the problem as, I get paid less than a male colleague that does the same work or even less, you could have multiple reasons for it. And one of the reasons I've heard actually said, and it probably isn't for your case, but the idea of aggressively negotiating for your pay. And sometimes men do it, sometimes men don't. These days I don't think they necessarily do it anyways. I think people tend to look to be paid something instead of actually demanding something. And sometimes men are just more naturally aggressive, and sometimes they get paid more. But I think in your case, it's probably the same thing I've seen, is that a woman gets started at $55,000 a year, and a man gets started at 60. That's what, and then maybe that changes, and then the excuse that's usually used is that they do more field work or something like that. There'll be excuses that pop up, whether they're real or not. But the point is that you're presenting the problem as fairly straightforward, but it's not straightforward. It's got a lot connecting to it. I haven't really discussed that, but we're not going to figure that out here. But the good news is that the same conversation is happening in multiple industries, and the best thing you can have is data, information on how genders interact over time and how to better manage that, and then also in a professional setting, and then also how to manage that blue collar, white collar setting, which is what we actually work in. I think a lot of conflict comes in, and sometimes it bleeds over and it paints the professional relationship a little bit grayer than the actual. So there's a lot of things there.
I think one of the things you touched on there is that it's not clear and cut and dry what the issues are or what the solutions are, especially with this.
It'd be nice if there's more research, especially on the unconscious bias. If you're saying, like, scratching my names, does that work? If it works, then great, let's do it. But that would be something that would be very good at academia, kind of really apply the scientific method to that, because it's a pretty easy thing to do. You just need a large enough sample size, to prove it. And more effort I think put into that kind of research would be really good. Because we can only come up with so many ideas because we're relatively small. And again, with different cultures, groups within it, blue collar, white collar, like it's a multivariate situation to begin with. And we have not a very small, but a smaller population size. So it'd be nice if there could be more push towards that kind of research in a broader community, so we can adopt those solutions for us as well.
Just, I don't want to dominate this, but what you can do moving forward is, what can you actually do now? What sort of things can you put your finger on now that would be true now that they will be in the future? And that way that'll help guide you with things. And one thing I've heard in this conversation is the debate between equal outcomes and equal opportunity. And those are the two camps that you can be in on this subject. And I would favor the equal opportunity as opposed to equal outcome. And I think most people would as well. So.
Which goes back to retention.
I have one dumb question. There's a new movement which was greater than the suffragette movement called Me Too. And I'd like to know if there's any indication or studies that has done anything to increase profitability and work ethics.
But that's been used to increase profitability and work ethics? That I know of. I know that within, so I mentioned the Me Too mining movement, and that's within the mining industry. I had a really nice graph that I was going to include of how much harassment there is in mining, but the sample size was really small. So there was a national survey done in Australia of all these different industries. In mining, 74% of respondents reported being harassed, but the sample size was only 50. And that's because it's a small industry relatively compared to like IT or HR or teachers.
Is it mining or mineral exploration?
It was mining.
Mining.
Yeah. And that's a difference too, right? Yeah. So I didn't want to include it because I thought that was not representative of an industry if you only have 50 people who responded. So with the Me Too mining movement is trying to, they're trying to set up a new survey and get more data to get a better idea of how prevalent it actually is. Other people don't want to talk about it either, right? It's hard, it's personal. So having to click that box, it opens up a lot of past emotions that people would rather maybe forget and not talk about. So it's difficult.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks,
Sarah.
Sarah.